Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So, from the Koran Interpreted, a translation by A.J. Arberry, number 33, the Confederates, and rather than what one hears on the news and all that, actual Hezbollah, as opposed to Hizb Shaitan, is a central theme up here. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, O Prophet, fear God, and obey not the unbelievers and the hypocrites. God is all-knowing, all-wise, and follow what is revealed to thee from thy Lord. Surely God is aware of the things you do, and put thy trust in God. God suffices as a guardian. God is not assigned to any man 2 hearts within his breast, nor has he made your wives when you divorce, saying, Be as my mother's back, truly your mother's, neither has he made your adopted sons your sons in fact, but that is your own saying, the words of your mouth, but God speaks the truth and guides on the way. So, no divorce by insult, and but there is a mystical experience where it's like you have 2, 3 hearts, and it's one I have relatively frequent. It's not a daily occurrence, but I think on my channel I've shared how I was having such an experience before. Call them after their true fathers, that is more equitable in the sight of God. If you know not who their fathers were, then they are your brothers in religion and your clients. There is no fault in you if you make mistakes, but only in what your hearts premeditate. God is all-forgiving, all-compassionate. And you don't rename people like property. That's not right. Whether it's a marriage or whether even people are acquiring slaves because of war or something, that you don't rename people like, that's not right. The prophet is nearer to the believers than themselves. His wives or their mothers, those who are bound by blood, are nearer to one another in the book of God than the believers and the immigrants. Nevertheless, you should act towards your friends honorably, and that stands inscribed in the book. And, the nearer and as, and, because when your own opinion and the opinion of your family and stuff, that's considered as something lesser, their standing, than people insulting the honor of religion. And when we took compact from the prophets and from thee and from Noah and Abraham, Moses and Jesus, Mary's son, we took from them a solemn compact, that he might question the truthful concerning their truthfulness, and he has prepared for the unbelievers a painful chastisement. O believers, remember God's blessing upon you when the host came against the O believers, remember God's blessing upon you when host came against you, and we loosed against them a wind and host you saw not, and God sees the things you do when they came against you from above you and from below you, and when your eyes swerved and your hearts reached your throats while you thought thoughts about God, and there it was that the believers were tried and shaken most mightily, and when the hypocrites and those in whose hearts is sickness said, God and his messenger promised us only delusion, and when a party of them said, O people of Yathrib, Medinat at-Nabi is what it's called now, it's been renamed, I forget what Yathrib means. O people of Yathrib, there is no abiding here for you, therefore return. And a party of them were asking leave of the prophet, saying, Our houses are exposed. Yet they were not exposed. They desired only to flee, and if entrance had been forced against them from those quarters, and then they had been next to apostatize, they would have done so, and but tarried about it briefly. Yet they had made covenant with God before that, they would not turn their backs, and covenants with God shall be questioned of. Say, flight will not profit you. If you flee from death or slaying, you will be given enjoyment of days, then but little. Say, who is he that shall defend you from God? If he desires evil for you, or desires mercy for you, they shall find for themselves apart from God neither protector nor helper. God would surely know those of you who hinder, and those who say to their brothers, come to us, and come to battle but little, being niggardly towards you. Stingy, niggard means stingy. When fear comes upon them, thou seest them looking at thee, their eyes rolling like one who swoons of death. But when the fear departs, they flay you with sharp tongues, being niggardly to possess the good things. Those have never believed God has made their works to fail, and that is easy for God. They think that the Confederates have not departed, and if the Confederates come, they will wish that they were desert dwellers among the Bedouins, asking for news of you. If they were among you, they would fight but little. You have had a good example in God's messenger, for whosoever hopes for God in the last day, and remembers God oft. When the believers saw the Confederates, they said, this is what God and his messenger promised us, and God and his messenger have spoken truly. And it only increased them in faith and surrender. Among the believers are men who were true to their covenant with God. Some of them have fulfilled their vow by death, and some are awaiting, and they have not changed in the least, that God may recompense the truthful ones for their truthfulness, and chastise the hypocrites, if he will, or turn again unto them. Surely God is all forgiving, all compassionate, and God sent back those that were unbelievers in their rage, and they attained no good. God spared the believers of fighting. Surely God is all strong, almighty, and he brought down those of the book. And he brought down those of the people of the book who supported them from their fortresses, and cast terror into their hearts. Some you slew, some you made captive, and he bequeathed upon you their lands, their habitations, and their possessions, and a land you never trod. God is powerful over everything. O prophet, say to thy wives, if you desire the present life and its adornment, come now, I will make you provision, and set you free with kindliness. And if you desire God and his messenger and the last abode, surely God is prepared for those amongst you, such as do good, a mighty wage of the wives of the prophet who wives of the prophet whosoever among you commits a flagrant indecency, for her the chastisement shall be doubled, and that is easy for God. But whosoever you is obedient to God and his messenger, and does righteousness, we shall pay her wage twice over. We have prepared for her a generous provision. And that's understandable if you think of the fact that, how close they are to the believers as examples and such. So they're with great responsibility comes great consequence. Wives of the prophet, you are not as other women. If you are God-fearing, be not abject in your speech, so that he in whose heart is sickness may be lustful, but speak honorable words. Remain in your houses, and display not your finery, as did the pagans of old. The misassociators, pagan, heathen, infidel, those aren't words that translate anything in Quran. As did the misassociators of old, and perform the prayer, ritual prayer, and pay the alms, and obey God and his messenger, people of the house. God only desires to put away from you abomination and to cleanse you, and remember that which is recited in your houses, and remember that which is and remember that which is recited in your houses of the signs of God and the wisdom. God is all subtle, all aware. And by wisdom, remember, we are also referring to the prophets have revelation. And that's the recited, the Quran, in the case of Muhammad ibn Abdullah. But the inspiration is the explanations. Men and women who have surrendered, believing men and believing women, obedient men and obedient women, truthful men and truthful women, enduring men and enduring women, humble men and humble women, women and men who give in charity, men who fast and women who fast, men and women who guard their private parts, men and women who remember God oft. For them God has prepared forgiveness and a mighty wage. It is not for any believer, man or woman, when God and his messenger have decreed a manner to have the choice in the affair. Whosoever disobeys God and his messenger has gone astray into manifest error. So in Islam, yes, there's the freedom of the system of judgment, the deen. It's not just religion, because some people, it would obviously include, aside from religion, other people are given the choice. But as far as spiritually, when you say that this is from the Prophet, this is the command from the Prophet, if you believe that, as soon as you believe that that was actually the command from the Prophet, one's supposed to do it. Now, you're not forced to in society, but and you also see the difference, in the duality. Sometimes the emphasis is drawn to the men and women thing, but that doesn't mean that all these he's and stuff don't refer to the women as well. The women have to are expected to take part in various things. Some things it's not obvious. Well, take care of your wives. It's like, obviously, that's not the women. But, yeah, so singular as an individual, together as a community. When thou sayest to him whom God has blessed, and thou hast favored, keep thy wife to thyself, and fear God, and thou wast concealing within thyself what God should reveal, fearing other men, and God has better right for thee to fear him. So when Zayd had accomplished what he would of her, then we gave her in marriage to thee, so that there should not be any fault in the believers touching the wives of their adopted sons, when they have accomplished what they would of them, and God's commandment must be performed. There is no fault in the prophet touching what God has ordained for him. God's want with those who passed away before, and God's command is doomed decreed. Who were delivering the messages of God, and who were fearing him, and fearing not anyone except him, and God suffices as a reckoner. Muhammad is not the father of any one of your men, but the messenger of God and the seal of the prophets. God has knowledge of everything. And this is one of the 4 verses that mention Muhammad's name. So, being descended from Muhammad's not a spiritual, because he doesn't descend, there aren't any male descendants. None of his sons survive. O believers, remember God oft, and give him glory at the dawn and in the evening. It is he who blesses you and his angels to bring you forth from the shadows into the light. He is the all-compassionate to the believers. Their greeting on the day when they shall meet him will be peace, and he has prepared for them a generous wage. And whether it's in remembrance, aside from that, or during the prayer, we make contact with God for the sake of benedictions upon the prophet and upon his true followers, and the house, the purified house, those who his close family, and going on and forth. But apparently, who was it, Salman Farsi, or who was it that was also Ahl Bayt but wasn't his family? So the term extends beyond that. But people, they would say, the sons, and try to make things be inherited by the sons, and that was removed from our from our nation. That wasn't even possible. O prophet, we have sent thee as a witness and good tidings to bear in warning, calling unto God by his leave, and as a light-giving lamp, give good tidings to the believers that there awaits them with God great bounty, and obey not the unbelievers and the hypocrites, heed not their hurt, but put thy trust in God. God suffices as a guardian. O believers, when you marry believing women and then divorce them before you touch them, you have no period to reckon against them, so make provision for them, and set them free with kindness. O prophet, we have made lawful for thee thy wives, whom thou hast given their wages, and what thy right hand owns, spoils of war that God has given thee, and the daughters of thy uncles paternal and aunts paternal, and uncles maternal and aunts maternal, who have immigrated with thee, and any woman believer, if she give herself to the prophet, and if the prophet desires to take her in marriage for thee exclusively apart from the believers. And I believe at the point that this was learned that he didn't take any more wives, by the way. We know what we have imposed upon them touching their wives, and what their right hands own, that there may be no fault in thee. God is all forgiving, all compassionate. Thou mayest put off whom thou wilt of them, and whom thou wilt thou mayest take to thee. And if thou seekest any, thou hast set aside, there is no fault in thee. So it is likelier they will be comforted, and not sorrow, and every one of them will be well pleased with what thou givest her. God knows what is in your hearts. God is all-knowing, all-clement. Therefore, and there was a limit of 4 divorces. After that, it was sin. I've met men who've had more than 4 divorces, but so your maximum number of wives. But given the special circumstance, some of the prophets had more wives than that, and in former nations there may not have been a limit. But look at how they married. They married to form alliances. In the example of Muhammad ibn Abdullah, he had the marriage to form alliances. And you had a marriage because a woman had lost a good spouse to replace with a better spouse. And thou mayest put off whom thou wilt of them, and whom thou wilt thou mayest take to thee, and if thou seekest any thou hast set aside, there is no fault in thee. So it is likelier they will be comforted, and not sorrow, and every one of them will be well pleased with what thou givest her. God knows what is in your hearts. God is all-knowing, all-clement. And after they went to Medina, as it is now called, there was a problem with pretty much all his wives, and Muhammad kind of left for a month, and people didn't know whether he was divorced. His wives kind of knew because he didn't say, "Oh, I'm divorcing you," and everybody's worried the prophet's going to get divorced, and he could have divorced them all and moved on, but he returned to all of them. Thereafter women are not lawful to thee, neither for thee to take other wives in exchange for them, though their beauty please thee, except what thy right hand owns. God is watchful over everything. And it doesn't mean you can force slaves into marriage ever, but thereafter women are not lawful to thee. That kind of sounds odd in the English, but you know what I mean. That for their wives. O believers, enter not the houses of the prophet, except leave is given you for a meal, without watching for its hour. But when you are invited, then enter, and when you have had the meal, disperse. Neither lingering for idle talk, that is hurtful to the prophet, and he is ashamed before you, and God is not ashamed before the truth. And when you ask his wives for any object, ask them from behind a curtain, that is cleaner for your hearts than theirs. It is not for you to hurt God's messenger. It is not for you to hurt God's messenger, neither to marry his wives after him ever. Surely that would be in God's sight a monstrous thing, whether you reveal anything or whether you conceal it. Surely God has knowledge of everything. And, people would doubt forever that any of Muhammad's wives got married after Muhammad died. There is no fault in the prophets' wives touching their fathers, their sons, their brothers' sons, their sisters' sons, and the women, their women, and what their right hands own, and fear you God. Surely God is witness of everything. So, even the prophets' wives, they had those circles of relations that there was the degrees of interacting with them in terms of physical modesty and all that. God and his angels bless the prophet. O believers, do you also bless him and pray him peace. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammadin kama sallaita ala Ibrahima wa ala Ibrahima innaka Hamidum Majid. Allahumma barik ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammadin kama barakta ala Ibrahima wa ala ali Ibrahima innaka Hamidum Majid. And some people say Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammadin. Allahumma Salah Sayyidin Muhammadin wa alayhi wa salam. There's various things that people say, but the best to say are the ones that the Prophet taught us. God and his angels bless the Prophet. O believers, do you also bless him and pray him peace. Those who hurt God and his messenger, them God is cursed in the present world and the world to come, and has prepared for them a humbling chastisement. And those who hurt believing men and believing women, without that they have earned it, have laid upon themselves calumny and manifest sin. O prophet, say to thy wives and daughters and the believing women that they draw their veils close to them, so it is likelier that they will be known and not hurt. God is all forgiving, all compassionate. Some cultures, they wear chokers and stuff. That's not what we're talking about. It's not anything harmful. The full degree of modesty in public. Now with the hypocrites do not give over, and those in whose hearts there is sickness, and they shall make the commotion in the city. We shall assuredly urge thee against them, and then they will be thy neighbors there only a little. Cursed they shall be, and wheresoever they are come upon, they shall be seized and slain, slaughtered all. God's want with those who passed away before, and thou shalt find no changing in the want of God. And just like all these passages about the fighting of the disbelievers that are fighting you and driving you out of their home, and here are people that there's the conflict, the approach towards war, or the middle of the war, and they're saying, stop it, we want peace, and then they're causing problems with you or your neighbor and whatnot. So they're given chances and all this, and because war's not the preferred or the first wrong. It's more like the third in this case. So seize them and kill them wherever you find them. Yes, but it's not just some people who, you're hypocritical about your faith, we're going to kill you. No, that's absolutely not true. God's want with those who passed away before, and thou shalt find no changing the want of God. The people will question thee concerning the hour. Say the knowledge of it is only with God. What shall make thee know? Haply the hour is nigh. God has cursed the unbelievers and prepared for them a blaze, therein to dwell forever, for a long time. eternal hell is not in the Arabic, apparently. They shall find neither protector nor helper upon the day when their faces are turned about in the fire. They shall say, Ah, would we have obeyed God and the messenger? And they shall say, Our Lord, we obeyed our chiefs and great ones, and they led us astray from the way. Our Lord, give them chastisement twofold, and curse them with a mighty curse. And it's also the case that you find narrations about Prophet Muhammad making clear that there's a limit for some of these things. It may be, oh, you don't want to go to hell for anything, but O believers, be not as those who hurt Moses, but God declared him quit of what they said, and he was high honored with God. O believers, fear God and speak words hitting the mark, and he will set right your deeds for you and will forgive you your sins. Whosoever obeys God and his messenger has won a mighty triumph. We offered the trust to the heavens and the earth and the mountains, but they refused to carry it and were afraid of it. And man carried it. Surely he is sinful, very foolish, that God may chastise the hypocrites, men and women alike, and the idolaters, misassociators, men and women alike, and that God may turn again unto the believers, men and women alike. God is all forgiving, all compassionate.